Sure. So the question is, how do you address the comment that, at least in the shorthand I get in my emails of the State House, what don't you get about the word illegal? So, illegal is illegal. So I think the first of all, in terms of sanctuary city status or making sure that all people are sort of protected, is that I think the language, and Mayor Curtatone has done this very well, is that, look, no matter who is in our community, we want to protect all residents. And violating immigration law, while not ideal, it's not criminal. It's not a criminal act. It's not hurting anyone. It's a civil violation. And why are those who are conservative, highlighting one violation of a civil law and not, other laws? And the example I give is my hometown, is that, growing up in Acton, there were a couple of my friends or classmates' parents who got arrested for white-collar crime, right? But I wouldn't have wanted their parents to be afraid to call the police if there was a robber in their house or if they saw a crime happening in their neighborhood. By requiring police to collaborate with ICE agents, you're creating a chilling effect between immigrant families, whether they're legal or undocumented, to not have that trust or comfort with calling the police. So it's sort of asking that question, why are perhaps your family members prioritizing immigration law compared to all these other things that, people break the law all the time. I think the second part, which I often ask, critics, is, President Trump's executive order, again, is prioritizing virtually the deportation, of all undocumented immigrants. So is that something that they support? Are we really going to deport all 11 to 14 million undocumented immigrants in this country, which would cost tens of billions of dollars, wreck a lot of economies, and obviously rip families apart? So I think it's important to sort of connect the values and the compassion. I would say generally statistics and facts, don't always work, and that's just human nature. It's more about connecting to people's values. Cut all or remove all federal aid. So the good news is that our Constitution and many Supreme Court decisions help us, because you actually can't. A president can't use his or her power to deny different flows of federal aid that are embedded in laws. So, Title I, federal education aid, or CDBG money, or money perhaps that the EPA provides to a certain community, is that those are laws that federal money flows from, that an executive branch can't just say, well, that money no longer goes to that community. So we really believe that feel very certain that the threat of removing federal funding from sanctuary cities is a straw man. But I would say, from a values point of view, and I appreciate the statements of people like Mayor Curtatone and Mayor Walsh in Boston, is that they've said, well, but this is about our values, and if we have to accept federal money to discriminate or target, our residents, then that money is dirty money. So I agree with that statement, but I also would say that the law is on our side, that money would not be taken away if a community became a sanctuary town or city. Yeah, so first of all, I really think we need to direct, and I know there's been some calling campaigns directed at them already, but clearly hasn't had the impact yet, is that I will say, and those who know me know that I've been a fairly vocal critic of Governor Baker, is Governor Baker's statement for almost any bill pending on Beacon Hill is, I'll consider it when it reaches my desk. The only area where he has spoken out against legislation deals with immigrants. And it's not just the Safe Communities Act, but it's in-state tuition for the children of undocumented immigrants. It's the Safe Driving Act to provide driver's licenses to undocumented immigrants. So every one of those bills over the past 3 years, during his tenure as governor, he has gone on talk radio or made statements opposing those bills. And even more concerning, he reversed an order by Governor Patrick to prohibit the state police from collaborating with ICE agents. So he's also taken sort of affirmative action to target immigrants. So I think, unfortunately, we have to recognize that for the most part, the Republican Party, even so-called moderate Republicans, really continue to be anti-immigrant and make this connection that somehow a violation of a civil law of not having legal status in this country means you're a criminal. And it's a deeply disturbing, and I would say, xenophobic and racist assertion, but it's fairly successful with a lot of the public. So in terms of what we can do is continuing to call Governor Baker. I think if he comes to visit your community, making sure to be there and making a statement, and encouraging your legislators to call out Governor Baker as well. And I will say, just because I work with her on a lot of issues, one of the few legislators to really call out Governor Baker on a number of issues from this area is Marjorie Decker. She's been fantastic, so I really appreciate her work. Yeah, great question, which sometimes I forget to remind myself that not everybody knows the legislative process. So the question was, what is the timeline for the Safe Communities Act? So the bill has been referred both to the Judiciary Committee and the Public Safety Committee. The House bill was filed by Representative Juana Matias from Lawrence, who is the daughter of undocumented immigrants from the Dominican Republic. And I filed, of course, the Senate bill. So the bills have not had hearings. So that's the real focus, is getting the committee chairs and the members of the Public Safety Committee and the Judiciary Committee to endorse the bill, to report out favorably, and then it'll either go to the House or Senate for a vote, and then obviously to the other branch for a vote. I'd be the first to say that it's still an uphill battle. The bill was reported out favorably 4 years ago, and then unfortunately last session, and this is when it was called the Massachusetts Trust Act, the bill was sent to study. So there's a real nervousness, unfortunately, amongst a lot of legislators about touching any bill that deals with undocumented immigrants. So the advocacy is really important and needs to be statewide. Yeah, so if your state representative and state senator is not on either one of those committees, I think it's asking your state rep or state senator to send a letter to the committee co-chairs, asking them to report it out favorably. As I'm sure you have read, there's been a lot of affirmative statements both by Senate President Rosenberg and Speaker DeLeo that we're going to oppose the Trump agenda. We're going to stand up for Massachusetts values. Well, if that's the case, I can think of few other bills that do a better job of standing up for Massachusetts values and fighting against Donald Trump than the Safe Communities Act. So asking your legislators to send letters to the co-chairs to take up the bill early and report it out favorably, ideally this year. The Safe Communities Act Coalition does include groups like Centro Presente out of East Boston, the Brazilian Worker Center out of Alston. So the question is, how do we, as supporters of this legislation or sanctuary cities, reach out responsively to immigrants, many of whom could be at risk of deportation or lose their jobs? With that, did I correctly state your question? So yeah, that is a real concern, and just a small example, and I won't be able to be there because I'll be in another part of my district, but tomorrow I think there's a rally because there were some migrant farmer leaders out of Burlington, Vermont that shortly after they did a press conference or spoke out, they were arrested by ICE agents, and so we know that the Trump administration has this extremely cruel response to undocumented immigrants speaking out. So I do think it's a difficult one. I would say that I find often reaching out to churches or mosques or where people are already comfortable and perhaps aren't public, and connecting with them that way. So that's certainly what I've done in my district, especially with the Brazilian and Latino churches. I think that besides that, it's really connecting with someone who has the trust, perhaps, of the immigrant community, and having them bring you with them if you want to talk about this bill. But they're absolutely, completely understood. There's a fear of the intentions of anyone if you don't know them, if you're an undocumented immigrant, and we have to be very sensitive and more vigilant about that under the Trump administration. Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge that upwards of maybe 10 or 15 years ago, the largest group of undocumented immigrants in Massachusetts were from Ireland. So, and why our immigration priorities and targeting changing now that the demographics have changed of those who are undocumented. So I would assume officially that ICE would have the same approach towards undocumented Irish immigrants. That being said, I haven't seen too many Irish immigrants being raided or arrested, at least in Massachusetts. So I don't know exactly what ICE is doing with respect to that group of undocumented immigrants, but I would say that certainly what I have been hearing, and some of it is sort of rumor or speculation, is that there are ICE agents, whether in Massachusetts or in other states, where they're very clearly racially profiling people. So they're showing up in a community and asking people that look Latino or darker skinned, show me your papers. So again, that's to me the whole undercurrent impetus of the Trump administration, why they're doing this. But I don't know specifically what's happening with undocumented Irish immigrants. The question is that are there a number of local police chiefs or police officers who support the sanctuary city model because it leads to less crime and obviously more cooperation with all communities. So I would say that is definitely the case in communities where there's a high percentage of immigrants. The concern I have, and one of the main reasons I filed the bill, is that unfortunately there are communities where there may be police officers or police chiefs that don't have that point of view, and therefore we shouldn't subject people's civil rights to the whims of what a particular police chief or police officer thinks, and therefore my bill is statewide. So I would say that there have been a number of police chiefs, including Cambridge, Somerville, Boston, that have spoken in favor and the value of the sanctuary city model, but there are certainly police chiefs or police officers in other parts of the state, including parts of my district, that either are silent on it because they don't want to get involved, or are they somehow led to the belief that they're actually reducing crime by targeting undocumented immigrants, and that's why it's so important for us as residents, as citizens, as activists to get involved at the local level. So first of all, I do want to give Arlington a hand, because I think you might become the first town that's a sanctuary community. I think Amherst and Arlington are battling it out, so surprise, surprise. But I will say, I think that shows the importance of showing up, because in my own hometown of Acton, there was a hearing about it, and there were people that showed up in opposition and made suggestions that somehow undocumented immigrants were causing crime in Acton, but there were many more voices in support of it. So it's really important to show up. So I really applaud what Arlington's doing, and that's why we really need a state law on the books, because at the end of the day, if we're talking about law enforcement, it's up to the residents, it's up to elected officials, what those police officers do outside of their public safety duties. So there probably could be some tweaks in Boston, but I would say generally Boston does a very good job documented. And a lot of times people say, well, what does that really mean? Well, right now, any one of us, whether we're a U.S. citizen, legal permanent resident, or an undocumented immigrant, if we're arrested and held at a police station, automatically there is a check for any one of us who was arrested with the federal government, which also informs the local police if someone's immigration status. So that doesn't mean that ICE is asking to hold someone if they happen to be undocumented, but if they are undocumented, sometimes what will happen is ICE will issue a detainer, which all that means is a request to hold the person. Now, a detainer sounds fairly ominous, but all a detainer is a request. And the point is that it's not the responsibility of local and state police to enforce immigration law or to cooperate with the federal government on enforcing any federal law, whether it's enforcement of violation of immigration law or not paying your taxes or white-collar crime. And I think that's the important thing to remember is there's a focus just on a person's immigration status, which is a civil violation of federal law, but there are a whole bunch of other federal laws that people might violate that local and state police aren't involved with now. And so why, in this one example, do you have local and state police enforcing immigration law? And I would make the argument it's because of a xenophobic, right-wing approach to who should be determined or categorized as a criminal and who shouldn't. So if ICE or the police feel that someone is a criminal, in other words, they've broken state laws or they have probable cause that that person has committed a violent act, the police can detain that person. But just like any one of us that's a U.S. citizen, if there isn't that probable cause, then the person should be released. And that's really trying to apply that same status and approach to someone who's undocumented. So the bill prohibits that unless there's probable cause or if ICE actually goes out and gets a warrant, which is basically evidence that the person has committed a serious crime. So it's a very common sense approach that not only respects and honors the civil rights of a person, including an undocumented immigrant, but it also makes the community safer. And those who are here from Somerville or Cambridge probably already familiar with this because you've been sanctuary cities for decades. But the point there is that it improves public safety because then immigrant communities feel safe to report a crime in their city, in their community. Whereas if they think or know that the police are going to collaborate with ICE, are going to be involved in their deportation, then that person is not going to contact the police. And we know from evidence that sanctuary cities are actually safer than many or most communities that are not sanctuary communities or cities. So it has a policy argument behind it as well. So that's the sort of first piece of the bill. The second is a new one, thanks to our president, that would prohibit any state resources or databases going to assist the federal government in the so-called Muslim registry or any other registry based on nationality or religion or ethnic status. So, thank you. So the bill also does that. So whether it's state taxpayer dollars, whether it's the RMV database, is that if the federal government, under our president, decides to create a Muslim registry, which is entirely possible, this is something he talked about in the campaign trail, it would prohibit state taxpayer dollars from going to help with the creation of that registry. So that's the second main part. The third part, which unfortunately is desperately needed here in Massachusetts, is it would prohibit sheriffs from deputizing their employees to act as immigration officials. So we have 2 sheriffs in our state who have already deputized deputy sheriffs or law enforcement officials under their power to act as immigration officials in their sort of duties as working for the sheriff. So we prohibit those agreements. They're called 287G agreements. And the last piece is that if someone is detained and happens to be undocumented, that there must be notice to that person that they have the right to hire an attorney. Now, there is not a right to provide an attorney. It's not a criminal defense dynamic where you have Gideon rights to counsel, but it's just informing the person they have a right to counsel. And what we know is that when someone has a lawyer, they're far more likely to have their rights protected, and the percent of individuals or families that are deported when they have an attorney goes down significantly compared to those who are unrepresented. So it's a right, informing they have a right to an attorney. The urgency of this with respect to President Trump is that the standard he changed in his executive order. And again, there was already a problem with how ICE agents were targeting undocumented immigrants under the Obama administration. And that's why I came to file the Trust Act about 4 years ago. And what that problem was is that even though the Obama administration under the Secure Communities program said that they were only targeting undocumented immigrants who had committed a serious crime, which is generally a crime of violence or a crime of a property crime of a certain amount of money. About 50%, at least in the beginning of the program, of the immigrants who were deported had not committed any crimes. They just happened to be without legal papers. So what President Trump did with his executive order, and this is the January executive order, it's not related to the Muslim ban, is he said that anyone who is arrested, anyone that has been convicted of any crime, no matter how minor, or anyone who is deemed a threat to public safety is a priority. So virtually that means that every single undocumented immigrant in this country is now a priority under the Trump administration. And we're seeing that happen. And it actually just happened a couple days ago in Massachusetts. The Metro West Daily News, one of the papers that covers my area, there's a story from a couple days ago I posted on my Facebook, is that ICE went to the town of Milford, which has a fairly large immigrant population, and they were searching for someone who had been convicted of drunk driving probably about 2 decades ago. And the Milford police cooperated with the ICE agent. The person was arrested and now is going to be deported. So that happened on over the weekend. And the point being is we've changed the priority level, so now virtually anyone is at risk. And I've certainly been hearing a lot of this from the district I represent as well. The district I represent is a Metro West district, includes communities like Marlborough, which has a very large Brazilian and Central American population. And actually, before I came here tonight, I was speaking at a church in Marlborough that serves mostly Latino immigrants. And I don't think I have to tell anyone here, but people very nervous. Obviously, you have stories of children afraid to go to school because they're afraid that their parents will be deported or arrested. So it's to me, it's something that is deeply antithetical to American values and Massachusetts values. First of all, essentially creating a federal police that can basically roam anywhere in this country and target people. But second of all, as I try to point out to some of my constituents who may disagree with me, is that there are literally thousands of federal laws, both criminal and civil, where all of us break the law, but our president is only focused on enforcing immigration law, which at this time is almost entirely directed at people of color and often people from South and Central America. So, that's deeply troubling. It's opposite to our values. I appreciate the turnout here today. And in terms of the advocacy, I think it's fair to say that most of the legislators in this area probably have co-sponsored the bill, but if they haven't, reaching out to your state representative and state senator. The other amazing thing that's happened, especially for those who are not from Cambridge or Somerville or Boston, is asking your town or city, your board of selectmen or your city council to pass sanctuary city or sanctuary town, or sometimes it's called welcoming community or safe community status, but making sure the language is strong. and making sure that local police are not involved with this policy. And I would just finish and say is that there's a value in that making sure we're standing up wherever we are from for our fellow residents and neighbors, but also that the groundswell effect that has across Massachusetts is that the more communities become areas of protection for all residents, including immigrants, the stronger message that sends to Beacon Hill, and the more likely it is to pass this legislation. So it's been an amazing sight to see. I've been out to Amherst, I've been to Lowell, I've been to Lawrence, I've been to Worcester to talk about the Safe Communities Act, and it's been wonderful to see the positive grassroots activism. At the same token, there are municipal officials, there are constituents that don't yet agree with this policy or perhaps oppose it. So we're in a situation where we can really make a difference, making Massachusetts a sanctuary state, making sure our communities are safe communities. And I really appreciate the turnout here, and I look forward to the dialogue. Thank you very much. I love the direct questions. Yeah, so the question is how many undocumented immigrants were deported in Massachusetts over the past 3 years, and how many more will it take before there's a sit-in at the State House? So I don't exactly know how many undocumented immigrants were deported in Massachusetts over the past few years. I would say it's probably on the number of probably a few thousand, up to maybe 10,000. Under the Obama administration, I think around 500,000 undocumented immigrants have been deported during his entire tenure of 8 years.
2.4 million.
How many?
2.4.
Thank you. Sorry, I was adding the terms, not adding the terms. So 2.4 million undocumented immigrants have been were deported under the Obama administration, and which was more than the 3 previous presidents combined. So again, we already had a problem. There certainly have been sit-ins at the State House, by pro-immigrant, activists. So I welcome more of them. I think the question is, you're welcome at the State House, but also directing it to legislators that haven't yet endorsed the bill and asked them to sponsor the bill. So sit-ins are great at the State House, but I think it's also about targeted efforts, whether towards Governor Baker or legislators that aren't yet supportive. Yeah, I mean, I would say in terms of parts of the state where I would hope that there would be strong support for the Safe Communities Act. I think Metro West, so where I live, so towns just west of Newton or Belmont, so towns like Concord, Acton, Framingham, Needham. I think that any community that has a large percentage of immigrants, so many cities and communities, so for example the city of Waltham, so I think that's sort of easy communities to highlight. I think the difficult conversation to have is that often in communities where there's a large percentage of immigrants, those that aren't immigrants, more often not those who are white residents, often are the most opposed to these policies. And so that's it's really critical for immigrants and pro-immigrant citizens, if you will, in those communities to speak out in favor of these policies. Absolutely so, and this was the other part that I should have talked about, is what does co-sponsorship mean, and how do you find the bill numbers online. So I don't think I made enough copies for everyone, but hopefully most people got a copy. Is the bills finally do have the official bill numbers, so it's Senate 1305, House 3269. So there's a difference between the House and Senate on deadlines for co-sponsorships. Unfortunately, the House has a firm deadline, which is passed for people to co-sponsor the House bill. But through one of the reforms I advocated 4 years ago, Senate bills, both House and Senate and House members can always co-sponsor the Senate bill throughout the session. So a state rep or state senator from anywhere in the state can co-sponsor Senate 1305, which is the bill I filed. So you can, when you're reaching out to family members or friends in other parts of the state, you can ask them to co-sponsor that bill. They are online through the mass.gov/legis, Legis, and you can look up the bill numbers and see who's co-sponsored. And on the Senate side, when someone has decided to co-sponsor a bill that hadn't before, that name gets added usually within, I'd say within a week. I don't think there's a website yet that specifically lists, at least under the bill that I filed, which are sanctuary cities. So it's something we have to work on. I think right now it's essentially Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, Springfield, Lawrence, and I think maybe one other community. So it's not many. So, but I don't think there's a specific official list. So just to summarize, so the point being about resources is the ACLU is an excellent resource and is part of the ACLU's freedom agenda, which I love the messaging. This legislation, as well as I think a bill specifically focused on banning a Muslim registry, are in the ACLU's legislative agenda. So the ACLU has already had great resources, and thanks to a lot of contributions, they have even more to look at each community and their policies. And again, that's really the concern I have, is that every single community, unfortunately, there are varying policies, attitudes, interactions between the police and communities. It's really unacceptable. We need state and federal standards. Thank you so much for having me, and I'll be around for a bit.
Thank you, Jamie Eldridge.